of sea level rise by the end of 2100 only. You have to take a look at tides, king tides, storm surge, wind waves, all of which comes up with a total water level of, say, 8 feet or 9 feet. You have to be adaptable over time to all of those kinds of stressors. And so this new wharf actually does that. Housing. Here's a marvelous new senior housing complex in, of all places, the Oakland estuary. So if you take a look at this, it doesn't really stand out at you as something that might be adaptable, but it really is. Because we all know that within the next 25 years, that lower wharf is basically going to be underwater. But we wanted to make sure that where you see the people walking and the behind it actually can have a life expectancy of, say, 50 to 75 years. And so they designed it in that way, which is not what they had planned to do in any way, shape, or form. But they took a look at the regulations, they listened to the commission, and they recognized they needed to adapt. Now, is the rest of the Oakland estuary built like that? No. But that doesn't mean that BCDC doesn't permit it. What it does mean is that BCDC needs to lead the effort, as required under state law, to make sure that the Bay Area actually is resilient, and we plan for larger scale as we go forward. Here's the big one that's going to be coming before BCDC during the next few months, Treasure Island. 8,000 new units. Somewhere, what, 15,000 people on Treasure Island, Sam? Isn't that what people are basically saying? And Treasure Island was created right around World War II, of course, right before World War II, and used then as a base during World War II. And as you can see, they are designing for resilience in a huge way. But this is going to cause an awful lot of discussion within the Bay Area, because all of a sudden you're creating a new kind of city that's protected by levees. This was approved by the City and County of San Francisco about 5 years ago. And BCDC has jurisdiction only over the outside edge, taking a look at how they're going to protect those buildings and what the public access really is, along with the causeway between Yerba Buena Island and Treasure Island and the marina. A big, big issue that will come before BCDC. And how do we take a look at it? Well, this is one way. BCDC commissioners insist upon taking a look at how we actually analyze how sea level is going to affect property and how sea level is going to actually affect the applications. So this is just a cross-section, one of many that the commissioners and staff will take a look at. And here are the final two slides as I rush through this, but they really, I think, go toward your question about how you actually have people work together. A few things to consider. Assets are networked. SFO can always build bigger levees, allow planes to land. But nobody's going to be able to get there if 101's underwater and BART isn't protected. The Port of Oakland. Well, the ships can get there because all that's going to have to do is move the cranes are totally adaptable. But how are the trucks and the trains going to get on the back end of the Port of Oakland? And so where are those goods going to go, and how are the goods going to actually get there? Collaboration is really challenging. And one of the ways you have to think about collaboration is that the Bay includes both wetlands and wastewater treatment plants, and they need to collaborate in the future, because much of the wastewater that is clean can actually help bolster new wetlands. Local governments have prerogatives. Land use is certainly chief among them. The private sector doesn't like to take risks. They're not terribly prepared. We have to make sure that they all collaborate. The assets that are at risk, they don't move. 101 doesn't move between San Francisco and SFO. It can't go west because you have endangered species. We have to figure out a way to ensure that literally and economically place-based assets, which are, I should say, literal and economic, that are expensive to buy, they're expensive to replace, they're expensive to move if you can do it, actually are looked at holistically because they're all networked. And finally, underserved communities have to be part of the solution. East Palo Alto, West Oakland, Richmond, San Rafael's Canal District, they are all at risk. But when we do this, we have to both, as John Wooden used to say, hurry up, or be quick but don't hurry, or however he used to say that. Because the way it works is that time is actually an asset. We don't have to figure out what we're going to do 200 years from now. We have to figure out what we're going to do during the next 20 years to make sure that we can be resilient over the next 50 to 60. And in doing so, we then not have to foreclose options for our grandkids. It's a tricky space to be in. How do we do it? You asked how we collaborate. This is the groundbreaking program and the award-winning program that BCDC and NOAA have done over the past couple of years called the Adapting to Rising Tides program. Community-based assessments and vulnerability analysis with real people on the ground from neighborhoods, NGOs, local governments, special districts, state agencies. We're all at the table together, working together. And it's complex, it's time-consuming, and it's way expensive. This is retail planning. This isn't wholesale planning. This is individual, place-based planning that you can then grow large over time. And there are multiple network challenges that are place-based. You can't simply take individual assets and make them resilient individually. That's why this is working in Hayward. It's why it's working in Oakland. It's why it's working in Alameda County. And you ask, or your staff has asked, what do we actually need and how do we do it? Well, we are working with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the State Transportation Agency to get funding from them to do art around the Bay, because 40% or so of the assets that are networked are transportation-based. And they recognize that they can't move Highway 101 on their own. They can't raise Highway 92 on their own. BART can't simply do BART on its own. We need to make sure that we do it together with all the other assets at one time so we can do it holistically and actually make it work. So that's how I'll end.
Great, thank you. And this is a great discussion and conversation and illustrative. And I think sea level rise is one of those things that is very tangible, and that's what you're working on. And it's a great place to start in the bigger picture of how we adapt and build resiliency. So back to the coastal area, Sam Shuckett from the Coastal Conservancy.
Thank you. And Jay, will you work your magic?
My best.
You know, Jay has worked in most of the agencies in the resources agency, and I can see that
So good at PowerPoint.
except IT, but obviously he's mastered that skill. So thank you. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Sam Shuckett. I'm the Executive Officer of the State Coastal Conservancy. I'm delighted to be here, and in fact, I always wear bow ties. The Coastal Conservancy is the project agency within the state's coastal management firmament. So we do not regulate. We plan and build things working with local governments and NGOs and other state agencies. And as state agencies go, we are something of a Swiss Army knife. If you look at our statute, we have a wide variety of tools that are available to us, all of which, it turns out, are useful for the question of adapting to sea level rise and to climate change generally. We actually have been working on sea level rise for a very long time before we even were thinking about it that way. This is a little bit about our managed retreat project at Surfers Point in Ventura County. This took 20 years to get from the planning and discussion stage to the implementation stage, and it's actually not finished. What you're seeing on the right is phase one. There will be a phase two. But it is one of the first managed retreat projects in the state. We moved everything about 60 feet inland and helped the community essentially get its beach back so that those surfers don't have to scramble over rocks. They can now actually walk on a nice trail. Hopefully, we'll be able to move to phase two. That's not supposed to be there. There it is. So we've adopted a number of principles in our work, and these are based on various sort of planning documents that have been floating around in the world of climate change adaptation. Generally speaking, we're interested in nature-based solutions. We believe in using the best available science. We want to focus on future conditions, not just what is happening in the present. We need to be able to account for uncertainty, and the uncertainty of the projections is really one of the biggest roadblocks we find in working with local governments. There's a lot of local governments that kind of just want to be told what to do. Like they want us to say, yeah, it's going to be 16 inches in 50 years. That's what you're planning for. But unfortunately, the science doesn't really let us do that. We're always looking for ways to minimize greenhouse gas emissions or to sequester carbon as a part of our adaptation efforts. and we need to address the needs of underserved populations. We parenthetically did an analysis of our projects, of all of our projects, not just our climate projects, since the year 2000, which is as far back as we have a database of projects for, and we discovered that on average, for every dollar, about 40%, about 40 cents have gone into communities that are at the 80% or less of the state median income, which happens to be the definition of an underserved community in Proposition 1, which is why we picked that. But we want to keep that in mind always. We launched our Climate Ready program in 2013 after the legislature and the governor signed into law a new, really just a few sentences in our statute, but they give us a pretty broad authority to do nearly anything in the climate space, if as it were. And we really see our role as doing our best to help local communities, local governments, and NGOs figure out what they need to do to adapt and then help them do it. And that is both in the coastal zone of California and in the Bay Area as well. We have funded 2 rounds of Climate Ready projects, and at our board meeting on June 25th, right here in Sacramento, so you can come on by. We'll be in the Cal EPA building. We expect to announce our 3rd round of funding. We've received $63 million of requests for nearly 300 projects around the state. Everything from adaptation to greenhouse gas reduction, planning and implementation. We've been able to authorize so far 31 projects totaling $5.2 million. And the 3rd round will be another 13 projects totaling $1.9 million. So the demand is enormous and beyond our capacity to fill under our current funding or probably under any future imaginable funding scenario, unless you guys just become insanely generous. And I should say, we have, at any given time, we have 200 or 300 active projects. I've been at the Coastal Conservancy for 15 years. I've probably signed off on, well over 1,000 projects. Almost all the RFPs we get are worthy of support. Almost all the proposals that are submitted are good proposals that, if we had the money, we would be happy to fund. I want to stop talking about specifics for just a moment and give you a framework for how we think about adaptation projects and implementing them. And what I've put up here for you is a schematic of the world of adapting to sea level rise and to climate. And the taller the green arrow is, the more expensive something is, and the longer the green arrow is, the longer it takes, right? And the things that are on the left of the dotted line are things that you don't have to do often. So we need to update LCPs and we need to update general plans. Fortunately, we don't have to do those things every year. We need to do them as conditions change. Vulnerability assessment, adaptation planning, the kind of modeling that the state has helped fund, the kind of tools that the OPC provides, data collection. These aren't things that you have to do over and over and over again, typically, although some of them are things you have to redo, every now and then. Then you get into the world of actually building projects, of actually restoring a wetland, of actually raising a wharf, of actually doing some managed retreat. And no matter how much of all of those initial planning activities you've done, and no matter how much applied research you've done, you still, in our regulatory system, have to engage in a very long period of project planning. That typically costs about 10% of the total of a capital project. On average, that's a good rule of thumb. That gets you through final design and engineering and permitting. And I do have to get permits from these gentlemen to my right whenever I want to do anything. And Such permits are never, unreasonably withheld. The irony of the work that we do is that the actual construction typically takes place very quickly. The Surfers Point project, it took 18 years to get to implementing the project. It was built in 2 construction seasons. So 18 years of project planning based on research and initial planning and discussion, 2 years of construction, and now we're into monitoring. And I think one of the biggest problems that we face conceptually as we try to move the state towards adaptation is the very long lead time to actually get to a project. And it's not unusual in our world that by the time you've actually got the bulldozers and or the people planting, eelgrass out there, that you're 10 years from where you started the project, and the science has changed, and the sea level rise estimates have actually increased. So that's a conundrum. Time is our, it's one of our non-renewable resources. We have time to adapt. But when you think about how long major capital projects take, suddenly, 2030 doesn't seem like it's that long from now. So now I want to actually pander directly to the panel by talking about projects in all of your districts, as opposed to wearing a bow tie, which I kind of normally do. So these are some examples of things that we have funded within our Climate Ready rubric. And one of the questions that you asked us is, how are we implementing the Safeguarding California plan? So we actually went back and took a look at the actions in the Safeguarding Plan in the ocean and coastal ecosystem section, the water resources section, biodiversity and habitats, and climate risks to California forests, and we simply counted. So the suite of projects that we are engaged in are actually implementing 21 out of 24 actions in the climate plan. And I'm not going to read them all to you because it would be, incredibly boring, but I can hand this to Nicole, at the end of the hearing. Here's an example of an applied research, / initial planning project. This is in Monterey Bay. Sea level rise and its economic impacts. That's actually the hotel that I think you guys meet in sometimes, and I know we've had Fish and Game Commission meetings there. Monterey Bay has one of the highest erosion rates in the state, 5 to 6 feet a year. A mitigation report estimated that that managed retreat would actually create a $1.25 billion net benefit over continuing to develop seawalls in Monterey Bay. So we are currently funding a vulnerability assessment for the bay and an economic impact of climate adaptation strategies. And the Ocean Protection Council is funding it, at the same place and at the same time the LCP update, which is a nice example of how we are actually coordinating our work. One of the reasons we are funding what we are funding in Monterey Bay is because the OPC is funding the LCP update, in the same place. And the idea is that these studies will work together synergistically. Actual construction and project planning, Salinas River and Elkhorn Slough. The Salinas River project is actually on the docket to be hopefully approved by my board at our June meeting. This is looking at using dunes to actually protect 15 to 20 acres at the mouth of the Salinas River and the Salinas River State Park. And the Elkhorn Slough project is a tidal marsh enhancement project. We're going to test adding sediment to the marsh to see if that will help the marsh adapt over time to rising sea level rise. And we're also testing a similar technique at the wetlands at the Seal Beach Naval Weapons Station in Southern California. Los Angeles County has some of the most iconic and heavily used beaches in the state, if not in the country. I don't know where the picture on the right was taken. It almost never looks like that. It's always more like, like what you see on the left. December. Yeah, maybe mid-December, middle of the week. We're quite worried about what's going to happen to the state's beaches. We are working with LA County Department of Beaches and Harbors to assess the vulnerability of their county beaches. So these are all the beaches that we're looking at, and the goal is to have an initial adaptive management plan with strategies to how to preserve the beaches as long as we can, that is as environmentally sensitive as it can be, as well as economically sustainable. In San Francisco, as you know, there was a major investment in a wetland restoration at Crissy Field, which in a sense is going to be completed and sort of expanded when the Doyle Drive project is complete. But this is an example of a project that was built sort of at the dawning of our understanding of sea level rise. So we are funding a vulnerability assessment that will lead to adaptation strategies for this area that was once a wetland and then was an airfield and has now been restored to wetlands, and which gets, by the way, an incredible amount of use all the time. I've never been there and not seen hundreds of people running and jogging and walking their kids and throwing a frisbee and doing all those good things. This is another vulnerability assessment and sea level rise resiliency strategy that we're funding for the city of Imperial Beach. This is a city that actually has water on 3 sides. They've been very active in the San Diego consortium that Ms. Bedworth talked about, one of the regional consortiums around sea level rise. They actually have some very nice beaches, although not. This is what they're left with as a result of coastal armoring at this particular location. The other thing that's interesting about Imperial Beach is that this is a city that has sort of embraced ecotourism as a potential economic driver for its future. So this is one of the places where the Cosmos model that we are funding with U.S. Geological Survey will help the local community figure out what the threats are that they face. This is the southern coast of Santa Barbara, where we are helping to model the coastal hazards and vulnerabilities. Should be completed later this year, and then move into actual adaptation planning, implementation planning. And this is one of the places where the LCPs are being updated. And the Santa Barbara coastline is also a place where the Coastal Conservancy historically has made considerable investments in land acquisition and in coastal access. So there's a substantial demonstrated need to assist local governments in all phases of adaptation planning and then move to implementation. And what I hope I've communicated in my presentation and what you've heard from my colleagues clearly is that there are tremendous technical, financial, and also, honestly, staff capacity challenges to all of us, as well as to the local governments that we work with. We're actually, I didn't put a slide up here about it, but we are actually funding San Mateo County, which is the county in the Bay Area in fact, it's the county in the state of California with the greatest economic risk from sea level rise. So we are actually funding a position in county government, which they will then take over a year from now to work on their vulnerability planning, because they didn't have one, and it's the only county in the Bay Area without a countywide flood agency. So that's an interesting example of a capacity problem. The good news is that Proposition 1 will enable us to continue at least some of this work, particularly wetland and subtidal habitat restoration that provide multi-benefits that include flood protection and water sustainability projects and management projects, including coastal flooding from rivers. The Coastal Conservancy has about $100 million of Prop 1 funding. We expect our board to adopt our guidelines as well as an update to our strategic plan at our meeting on June 25th. and I look forward to taking your questions later.
Thank you. All right, State Lands Commission, Jennifer De Leon.
Good afternoon, Chairman Stone and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer De Leon. I am not Jennifer Lucchesi. Executive Officer Jennifer Lucchesi sends her sincere regrets for not being able to make it here today and asked me to stand in for her, so I beg your patience as I present her talking points. So I like to start with this slide because it really illustrates why we're here today. We are talking about California, very populous state with the vast majority of its citizens living on or near the coast. The State Lands Commission recognizes that, therefore, that it's critically important to plan and prepare for the impacts of sea level rise to ensure that the state's coast, including its public trust lands and resources, are protected and preserved for current and future generations. As the Commission charged with managing these public trust lands and resources, the Commission also recognizes its role and how it fits in with the overall partnership among other coastal agencies, both at the state and local level. Interagency collaboration examples that I wanted to just highlight up front as they sort of flow through the rest of the presentation involve our participation on the Coastal and Oceans Climate Action Team and the Safeguarding California Implementation Collaborative, the State Coastal Leadership Group on Sea Level Rise, which we're all part of, and the California Collaborative on Coastal Resilience, which is an effort that's being undertaken via the state leadership group with a pilot project being conducted and ongoing efforts in Humboldt County, and I believe you'll hear a little bit more about that with a later speaker. So really quick context. The commission consists of the lieutenant governor, the controller, and the finance director. It's a three-person commission charged with implementing and protecting the public trust doctrine. So you can see from this slide that the public trust doctrine applies to all the tide and submerged lands in California, as shown here. It's rooted in ancient Roman law and common law. What that means is that it's been malleable over time, formed and shaped by court cases and other decisions that are made that help us define and implement public trust doctrine policy. The Commission sees itself as a land and resource trust manager. It serves the people of California. It is not a regulatory agency. We issue leases, not permits. To put this in greater context, the State Lands Commission and State Parks really comprise the two primary landowning agencies along the coast, while the Coastal Commission and BCDC are the regulatory agencies responsible for regulating the development both on public and private lands. What this really means is that the Commission assumes responsibilities as trustees for the lands and resources under its care, but it also means that its jurisdiction is land constrained in that it can exercise no authority, jurisdiction, or decision making on private uplands that are beyond the Commission's land owning boundary. The public trust doctrine is integral to the state and to the State Lands Commission's work. The public's right to use and access California's waterways for commerce, navigation, fishing, boating, water-oriented recreation, and environmental preservation is protected by the public trust doctrine. It ensures that the title to sovereign land is held by the state and in trust for the people who are the beneficiaries of the trust. So moving from just sort of an overall context of jurisdiction into some emerging issues and challenges that the Commission feels are going to become more and more pressing through time and with the effects of sea level rise being felt. Our biggest issue as Commission and Commission staff is defining the boundary and grappling with challenges due to the changes in boundary that we expect to see with sea level rise. So the basics with boundary is that is defined by the ordinary high water mark as measured by the mean high tide line. Gradual and imperceptible changes in the location of the mean high tide line over time do not fix the boundaries, yet the boundaries instead remain ambulatory. The exception to this is where there has been artificial fill or accretion. In areas that are unaffected by this fill or accretion, the ordinary high water mark and the mean high tide line generally will be the same. However, where there has been fill or accretion, like a rock revetment, seawall, other types of fixing structures, the ordinary high water mark and mean high tide line and the state's ownership is generally determined based on the location of the mean high tide line prior to that fill or artificial influence. In other words, we look at the best evidence of the boundary from a historical perspective before the artificial influence. This slide contains a few illustrative photographs of what we call the coastal squeeze. This means that, and you saw this in the prior presentations, people built things before they understood about sea level rise or before it was a problem. Sea level rise is working its way through that space and will continue to gradually cause the public trust boundary to move inland toward those built structures. Boundaries between publicly owned waterways and adjoining private properties then are and have always been subject to the forces of nature. Property boundary law reflects these realities. However, we can see that it's becoming an issue that we can't ignore. We believe the focus on shoreline protective structures will intensify because of their purpose of protecting private infrastructure generally and their impacts, i.e. using state lands to protect private infrastructure has impacts to public access and public trust resources. Broad Beach in Malibu is a perfect example of this phenomenon, and you've heard that be discussed a little bit earlier. It's important to note that the State Lands Commission does not have a specific mandate to prevent shoreline protective structures per se. Instead, it considers requests on a case-by-case basis, considering the following: evaluating changing circumstances and purposes of shoreline protective structures, enhancing and protecting public access along waterways and public trust balancing, and considering what is best for the state and the people of California. As sea levels continue to rise, our staff anticipates receiving more applications for large-scale beach nourishment and protective structure projects on state property to address erosion and sea level rise. And if you remember from a few slides back, the public trust uses sometimes conflict with each other. There are many, and so that's when I say balancing, that it is on a case-by-case or project-specific basis, and the commission, in its capacity as the ultimate decision makers, listen to the applicant or the proposed lessee and also the staff recommendation, and then come to its determination in that individual circumstance